let's start our seminar. So today we have as a speaker Professor Henk Marquering. You probably have already looked at the bio of Henk, but I would like just to point out 3 or 4 main points. First of all, you know, let's say it's very interesting that Henk has obtained his PhD in theoretical seismology, and then he was a postdoc at the Princeton University. Seismology, anyhow, it is like almost physics, so it's well, this agrees with my opinion that studying physics is very useful because you can be efficient in any area of science. And then his experience was really related with computing, modeling in the area of blood flow. And what is more interesting that Henk for a long time was involved in application of artificial intelligence methods for computational medicine. And the last fact, which well is for me is very let's say something which makes some kind of let's say fascinating of this is that besides of his 300 papers, he also supervised something like 60 PhD students. So this is a challenge. Henk, screen is yours.
Thank you a lot, Marian. It's a great pleasure to give a presentation to Sano. I was there only a week and a half ago, I think. It was very impressive surroundings. Next time, maybe I prefer to give a presentation in person, but now we can do it online as well. As Marian was saying, it is a bit of a monologue for me. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Interrupt me any moment that you want. That makes it also easier for me. So my name is Henk Marquering. I am a professor in radiology and focusing a bit on the translational artificial intelligence, and the translational part is really focusing on how we can get theoretical deep learning AI models and get it in clinical practice, which is not as easy as it may seem. So therefore also the topic of my presentation is a little bit different maybe than you're used to. I will also address methods and bottlenecks, hurdles to get our great AI work in the clinical practice. So clinicians always start with disclosures. So I am involved in 3 spin-offs from the Amsterdam UMC, and I'm also have some funding. So today, because my background is a little bit different, the topic is a little bit different, I will first introduce a bit of my career, such that you might understand where I'm coming from, and also why my presentation is a little bit different than you may be used to. And after that, I will discuss the stroke, how we can use AI techniques, medical image analysis for stroke, and I will finalize with the part on the valorization. So how can we get important and valuable solutions in practice? So I was involved in this part, seismology, earthquakes. As you see here, it can be quite devastating for human. But when there was an earthquake, I used to be very happy, very excited to learn about what was happening. And what we did with those earthquakes is make recordings, as you see on the right. So some people might see an EEG or ECG there. I always see earthquakes when I see those wobblings. And I've been focusing on making a relationship with recordings and the model that we're of the medium that the energy is propagating through. So we have an earthquake. You can see it maybe at 120 here the number and going to 60, and there's a relationship given by the colors. And when I was in in Princeton, we found out that it was not as easy as we expected, and a little bit different. And based on that, we developed our banana donut theory. If you're interested in it, there's a whole Wikipedia page still alive, I think. There's nothing to do with food, but the relationship on earthquakes and our Earth. And what we did with those images, we make with the recordings, is we make images, 3D images of the Earth, and seeing what kind of structure is under the surface of it. Afterwards, I moved into industry, and this may not be a common picture that you see in this Sano lecture series. You see here a Japanese newspaper, and you see a copy machine on the right. So I was working in a copy machine manufacturer, and we wanted to get intelligence actually in the copying machine. And what was one of the tasks is that if you have newspapers like this Japanese newspaper here, we wanted to find out what is a separate article and how can we interpret it. And if you look at it, it is quite complex because you see horizontal text and you see vertical text. And if you have vertical text, it goes from right to left. And if you have horizontal text, it goes from left to right. So it's quite complex to get the understanding in it. And what I started working on is developing image analysis for the development of the analysis of those Japanese newspaper articles. And as you can see here, we have the blue lines looking at the white pixels. So if you scan a newspaper, if you make a copy out of it, it is digitalized, and every pixel has then an intensity, and you can use that information to separate characters from each other, and with that information also separate lines from each other, and in the end articles. So that's how I got involved in image processing for the first time. And then my career was like a pinball machine. I switched a lot between academia and industry. So before I was in industry, then I moved to Leiden, which is the oldest university of the Netherlands, and started working on medical image analysis. And later on, I started working for a startup company where we did some image planning, image-based planning of procedures. And right now, I'm already for quite some time, I'm in Amsterdam, UMC, and focusing mostly on cardiovascular image analysis. But also here in academia, I did not stay purely in academia. I also started 3 spin-off companies, and I will come back to that later. So there's I did quite some switching between research and industry. And if you're in industry, you might find the code that is being performed in research more like spaghetti code. And that is displayed on the left. Whereas if you go into an industry where you really make software that is used by customers and has to be sold, then the quality assurance has become much more important. And I can imagine that people from Sano recognizes this. We all try to make our research code as clean as possible, but still it is quite different for industry where you have all people work on unit test itself and quality assurance, and that's quite a difference between the research software that I made. So I've worked with both. So I am aware of research code with spaghetti code, but I'm also aware of high quality code and try to make to set up a bridge between that. So what does it look like with my natural habitat? This is me on my desk. I'm looking happy because I have 2 screens and working on image analysis on that. And what my field was like, it was really like a rule-based approach. So here on the left, you see an image of the brain, and we have simplified the pixels that we have in an image by those large squares that you see. And on the right, you see a simplification of the code that we used to develop, I should say. So what we do is pixel by pixel, we look at the characterizations, we see what it looks like, and then we can classify it. In this case, we classify pixels as a skull or not a skull. And you go pixel by pixel, you go on, and this way you can analyze a full image of it and get some information out of it. And if you have those codes, then you can have full automatic segmentations, as you see here, where you have a 2D image of a artery. And by creating that code, you find those, you can create those codes where you do the analysis of the medical images. So I have been involved, and I'm still involved, I should say, in stroke. And let me also give a little bit of the background of stroke. And stroke fits very well in the umbrella term neurological disease. So there's quite a lot of neurological diseases, and as it has been declared the era of the heart quite some time ago. About 10 years ago, it was decided that this will be the era of the brain. And the brain is involved in quite a lot of diseases. We have ALS, we have Parkinson, we have Alzheimer's, and multiple sclerosis. And it is good to realize what field, how much stroke is contributing in the burden that we have in the world. So usually I'm asking people, okay, where do you think stroke is in this field if you compare it to Parkinson and Alzheimer? And I will not do this. I know how hard it is to give answers in an online seminar, but it's good for yourself to write down the answers. Maybe at the end we can do some comparison. So it is actually the dark blue part. Even if you compared with the very well-known Alzheimer and Parkinson's, stroke is a much larger burden to our world in the neurological diseases. So it's by far the severe disease that we have in neurological disease. And also if we compare it to cardiovascular diseases, because stroke can also be considered as a cardiovascular disease. And we look here at an image where the number of cardiovascular disease deaths are displayed. You see that after coronary heart disease, stroke is number 2 in the cause of death. But if you look at developing countries, or the countries which are in the rise, like Indonesia or other countries, it is certainly the main cause of cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular death. So more than 1 in 3 of all patients who die in a country like Indonesia, which is extremely large in itself, is caused by a stroke. So it is a very serious disease, and I hope I am convincing you at that point. So this is important. How do you recognize a stroke? If your grandmother or grandfather has one of these symptoms, drooping face, or loss of force in the arms, or a slurred speech, you should be aware that this could be a symptom of a stroke, especially if it suddenly starts. At that point, be fast and call 911 or 112. I don't know what is the alarm phone call in Poland, but directly, because time is brain, as is often said. And we'll come back to that later as well. So the symptoms can be relatively small. You can feel a little bit dizzy, or it can be very severe, like getting a coma. That can also be the result of a stroke. So the main cause of strokes are ischemic strokes, and ischemic stroke is that one of the arteries in the brain suddenly gets blocked by a blood clot, also called a thrombus. And this blood clot suddenly comes from an area, sometimes the heart or from the carotid arteries, and gets loose, and it moves all the way up to an occluded part of the brain, sorry, it's the nose part, and then suddenly all blood flow is being stopped at this point. And I think one of the most valuable animations that I've seen in my career in stroke research is this one. Here we see tubes which represent the arteries in the brain, and you see also a blood clot moving from distal parts, so closer to the heart, to further in the brain artery tree, where the arteries become smaller. And here you see also, for example, how such a blood clot can obstruct two parts of an artery, two parts of a bifurcation. And I was always puzzled how a thrombus can go into two parts of the bifurcation, but here you see directly a clot comes in one of the artery, the flow still goes on in the other part, and then the other part of the artery also gets clotted. So stroke is actually known for a long time. Already 400 years before Christmas, birth of Christ, BC, it was already described. It was described as apoplexia, which means struck by lightning, and also struck by the gods. And about 2000 years later, it was found out that this struck by the gods was actually caused by a blood vessel that no longer works and either gets occluded or it can be hemorrhaged. About 200 years later, there was already some preventive care where you see here the carotid artery that is running in the neck. Sometimes plaques can start to develop in this artery, in the artery wall. And if this plaque gets out of the artery wall, that can cause a stroke directly. So from that point on, carotid endarterectomy was performed where the plaque was removed outside of the arteries. But I find the following very shocking, and that is that the first treatment of what you can have when having a stroke was only introduced around the change of the century. Around the year 2000, the first treatment for a stroke was introduced. Before that, there was no treatment whatsoever. So if you came with a stroke, patients would just get in the hospital and they were just hoping that something good would happen, but nothing was done at that point. So at that point in the year 2000, thrombolysis was introduced, and which is the administration of a blood clot dissolving drug, and that could help for some cases. But it's not very successful, especially not for large blood clots. And then only about 10 years ago, thrombectomy was introduced, and thrombectomy, I will focus a bit more on that. So thrombectomy is a treatment where a catheter goes through the groin all the way up to the brain, where after placement of this catheter in the blood clot that you see here with a darker red part, a stent is being developed. And after the development of the stent, this stent is being retracted, whereas you extract the blood clot and opens the clot. And just to give you an idea, here you see the blood clot in scale. So it's about 1 centimeter long, as you can see here. You also see the stent that is being placed in such a stroke patient. So, and this is a large clot. And it also means that such a small object of less than a centimeter large can really have such a huge effect that can make sure that you live in care centers for the rest of your life. So in the Netherlands, around that time, a trial was started. It's called the Mr. Clean trial. And a trial is the way how clinicians measure the success of a treatment. It's not by imaging, it's not by understanding what a treatment is, but it's by a trial where the half of the patients get a treatment, the other half not. And based on that difference, it is decided whether the treatment is successful. And you can see it here on the right, where there is imaging of a patient before and after thrombectomy. And you see a large artery, which is the carotid artery, which runs through your neck. And you see that suddenly all the dark part, the contrast stops, and it is because a blood clot is occluding the artery. And after removing the blood clot, you see an image on the right where you see that the contrast is filling the whole artery tree in the whole vasculature. And what was very interesting for me at that point is that in this trial, a lot of new imaging was introduced. So because there was no treatment for stroke for such a long time, there was no reason to do any imaging, no CT, no MRI imaging, no X-rays. But since for this trial, we really needed to know which patients we are treating, suddenly at this point, we introduce all kind of treatment where you see on the left, CT perfusion imaging, where you have CTs at multiple time points. We have CT angiography, where a contrast is being added. But also the digital subtraction angiography in the middle. And you also have non-contrast CT, and you extract all kinds of interesting informations, like the artery tree on the right side. So that was a match made in heaven for me. Medical image processing was the job that I was doing, and image processing was really starting to play a role in stroke. And the good thing of having CT images and to do image analysis is that we can actually really measure. And to measure is to know, is what we say in the Netherlands. Meten is weten, and that is also becoming quite important. The good thing with CT images and MRI images that they are calibrated, so we know how large a pixel is, of a voxel, I should say, in 3D, how large a voxel is in a human body. So if you know how many voxels or pixels are displaying the disease, we can really measure that. And I will give you some examples here. So here an example on where you see a CT image of a patient who had a stroke. And you see some dark area on your left side, it's right side for the patient, and that is the infarct. That's the part of the tissue that did not get any oxygen and died after the stroke. So the measure of that infarct is very important in the prognosis. If you have a small infarct, you have good prognosis, probably have a good outcome. If you have a large infarct, it's bad outcome. And what is a typically radiological scale that was used? That was the 1/3 rule. If the infarct was larger than 1/3 of the whole hemisphere, people say it's a large infarct. If it's smaller than 1/3, they say it's a smaller infarct. But clearly, this is a very crude scale, and that's not something that you want to use in any other steps. So the next image with the right blob, you see the segmentation. So after the image processing, the pixels are delineated as stroke or not stroke. And if you do it this way, we can actually measure the volume of the infarct in the ml. And then it really has some good value. You see it on the image on the right, where you have a patient with a good outcome. in green and patients with a red outcome in red. And on the y-axis is the infarct volume as we measured after our image analysis. And you see that for patients with a bad outcome, the infarct is much larger than for patients with a good outcome. So with segmentation, so image analysis, we could now really measure it. And there are more scales of that. We have the success of a treatment. We call it recanalization. So we open the artery, and we want to measure also how good was the recanalization. And another radiological scale was the Tiki scale, which is either a 0 or 1, to A, to B, to C, or a 3. Well, clearly this is not a measure that people with a technical background, as most of us are, would like. So we also created alternatives for such an approach. And here we have also measures of the success of outcome. Another measure that is very important in stroke is the collateral circulation. So as soon as one of the arteries is occluded, other parts of the vascular tree takes over some of the function, and that's called collateral circulation. So through alternative pathways, still blood can come to the infarcted area. And here you again see the radiological scale that has been used. They have the scale 0, 1, 2, 3. And 0 means that there's no collateral circulation. And you see that on the image A, where you hardly see any vessels on your left side, so the patient's right side of the hemisphere. Whereas if in image D, you see as much arteries in the image on both sides, where we say, okay, this is measure 3. But again, a very crude scale and also very hard to work with. So also as an alternative for this, we made a quantitative circulation assessment where the amount of filled arteries in the occluded site is being measured. And then we have, again, we have a number rather than a scale. That's a full scale. And here we see how well the agreement is. On the x-axis, you see the standard scale that is used. We see the measures from 0 to 3. And on the y-axis, we see the quantitative measurements that we had. And you see that's a good correlation between those scales. But what's even more important, if we relate that measure, the quantitative measurement, with the outcome. So can we predict functional good outcome for those patients? You see here the ROC curve, and the dotted line is with the quantitative measures, and the solid line, step line, is the quantitative measure. And you see that it's even more accurate than the default measure that is used in clinical practice. So the last example I want to show is the detection of the thrombus itself, because that's the most important part in the diagnosis. And you want to know what's causing your clinical deficit, and this is what you then get. So here you see some images of the CTAs of the arteries, and you see where the circles are, that there is a stop of the display of the arteries that you see. So on the left side you see volume rendering. On the gray image you see also you see the CTA image, and you see where suddenly the artery stops, and that is the location of the thrombus. And it's not that easy to find actually. In another couple of those images where the arrow is, you see the stopping of the arteries, and this is a sign of an ischemic stroke. So rather than finding a structure that is important, we have to look for a structure that is not there instead of being there. And if you want to make a tool to to automatically generate it, it's also maybe even harder. So you have to tell a computer that you have to be looking for missing structures rather than structures. So we've been puzzling around with that, and we believe that we had a solution for this, and that's to make use of the symmetry. So we have two sides of the brain. They're approximately the same. There's a little bit of a difference between male and females on the left side, right side activities, but still there's quite some symmetry. So if we can project part of one part of the brain to the other one, maybe we have some information that can be used for the analysis. And this approach can best be explained by looking at this image. This is a night image of the world, and you see all the white dots is the light that is being produced at night, which is collected during satellite images. And a student of mine compared this the task that we have finding the thrombus by finding North Korea. So we know that Korea is a peninsula, but at night it is not allowed to put on any lights in North Korea. So you cannot find it by the signal, but rather by the lack of image, the lack of signal. So here you see still South Korea, it's western of Japan, and North Korea by the lacking of that light. And the idea that was used is that we look at some similar peninsula close by and determine the kind of structure that we have. So if we focus on Florida, which is also peninsula, with some comparison characteristics, there's a lot of signal, at night there's a lot of light, we extract that kind of information and we put that information on top of the south of Korea, and then the idea is that the missing part of the signal is where the object of interest is. And this is how we can then find the structure, and also in the CTA images we can find the thrombus. And indeed, if you look at the images, you see how well it fits our approach with the actual image that we have. So this is another example that after some tariffs, you can collaborate with other people from with the US. So one of the tasks that we had is to really detect the thrombus, and here you see again a volume rendering of the thrombus, and you see also how small it is. But with segmentation we can do some measurements, and you see here two images of the thrombus at the arrow, a non-contrast CT image and a CT angiogram where some contrast is added, and you see that in the non-contrast you see a little bit more signal, in the CTA you see the lacking of the signal. And what was found actually is that what we look at the intensity of the thrombus, there was quite some difference between the CT angiography and the non-contrast CT. We see it even better here, where you have a histogram of the Hounsfield values in the images, and you see by the dark blue image the Hounsfield units of the CT angiogram, where you also have quite some images of pixels with a higher intensity, and whereas compared with the non-contrast CT, you have intensities that are a little bit lower, much lower. So there's something happening. And if we plot the images, the intensity to each other, where the non-contrast CT is on the x-axis and the CTA is on the y-axis, you see some of the measurements are really well high above. So it seems like some contrast is sipping into the thrombi that we have. But this was completely different than all radiologists thought that was happening, because they always saw the thrombus as a cork, and no intensity could get through a cork. So that was something that was not directly believed by the radiologists. We can also maybe look at the CT angiography, digital subtraction angiography of the image. And if you look at where the radiologists usually look at, this is during the procedure, We look at the contrast, where the contrast stops, and this is at the arrow. This is how far the radiologists look. Then they know where the thrombus is, they know where to go to with the catheter. And but if you look a little bit further, let me see if I can, and if we only look at the artery itself, you see that some contrast is actually passing the thrombus. And this is also a sign that the thrombus is not completely occluding it, but it's actually some contrast is zipping through the thrombus. And the nice thing is, if we measure this, now we can have image processing, we can measure it. We see that for the healthy part, you see that by the running child is MRS 0, which means it's very healthy, whereas at MRS 6, you did not survive the stroke. You see that for the healthier patients with the outcome, the intensity increase in the thrombi really increases as much higher. And also, if we compare the infarct, the area that has died through the thrombus, with the increase in the Hounsfield units, you see a strong relationship, where small infarcts with large increase in the Hounsfield unit and the other way around. So in the meantime, patients were selected, and it was quite surprising that actually the people who did this trial also found it surprising, is that that there was a huge effect on the thrombus. And a lot of attention came in that. There was news all over the world. It was on the newspapers, the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune, and even a very small paper on page 12 of the Dutch newspaper showed the results of this trial, where we compared the thrombectomy with the other parts. And if you look really well, you see there behind me, behind there in the circle, that's me. I played a very small role where I only looked at the images, but still I was part of that trial. So what else was happening around that time, 2015? I was mostly involved in this stroke trial, and there was a lot of attention going suddenly, saying that AI was replacing radiologists. A lot of news came into it, and AI was suddenly a big hit, and a lot of newspapers came. And there was a lot of attention on in the newspapers, in LinkedIn, on the radio, on the television, and podcast. Suddenly everybody was talking about AI around that time. And I was a bit struck by that, because from my studies, I knew AI, but that's mostly about neural networks, but that was not very successful. So I was really struggling with what is this AI? And maybe some of you did the same thing. And looking again at what artificial intelligence was. And I was thinking, intelligence is mostly measured during high school or elementary school. I would say that if you are very smart, intelligent, you could do math very well. So at some point, well, I was thinking, okay, the calculator should be AI, but clearly it's not. Then I was very surprised that if you get a regression line, that was considered AI, apparently. And also about language, spelling and style replacement. Then I was also thinking, well, did be the AI part, but apparently it was not. And I was quite puzzled in the beginning, I have to admit. Maybe some of you recognize it. Maybe some of you knew very well what was the difference. But apparently the new wave of AI was focusing really on the data-driven part, whereas the calculator and language tools, software was rule-based, which was not considered AI. Well, in my exploration of AI, I also looked at how old it would be, and I was also looking at the birth date, and maybe you recognize all those years. All of them are quite important, and I found it quite interesting that an AI was actually started at 1955. So what was happening that in 1915 so much attention was going into AI again. And again, the Dartmouth workshop on AI was considered the birth date. And I don't know if any of you have seen the inventors recently, but in 2024, image of some of the people who organized this workshop was taken. And here you see actually how long ago it was, and that those people aged well as well. So what was happening? And I really wanted to look into it because all my radiology colleagues were complaining, oh, I'm losing my job and I don't know what's happening. And I noticed that we were actually in the middle of the third AI summer, where we had different areas with AI optimism and AI negativism. And the most striking part is what I thought is that the name was also changing. So before the workshop on AI, computer scientists would mostly talk about thinking machines. AI came, and after that was also a lot of negativism about AI. Later on, it was called expert systems, machine learning, and now again we live in an era of AI. But it was not all sunshine. We had some severe winters where there was a lot of reduced interest in AI. And I was quite struck when reading that over 3,000 AI companies were also already went bankrupt in those areas. So how can we do better? How can we learn from these mistakes? And if we look at those past AI summers or winters, let's see what went wrong and how we can improve it. So there was a lot of attention into AI, and was a lot of overly ambitious and unrealistic promises of AI. And based on those expectations, AI did not manage what they could do. And afterwards, this was reacted with a chain of pessimisms, and had all these bankrupt bankrupt companies, and those labs that closing as a result. So if you're interested in this topic, I have to warn you a little bit. If you look for AI winters in books and you want to read a book about it, it is also a writer who writes about science, a little bit different approaches. So anyways, the AI summer, we're now in the third AI summer, and there are quite some changes. We have much more data, we have much better computing facilities, but also there's now a strong focus on health. And if we look at the very early part of the third AI summer was IBM's Watson. It was extremely intelligent, and it was so intelligent actually that it won an issue of Jeopardy, where it was competing with two of the previous championship of Jeopardy. It was much better than both of those. And also in medicine, it had a huge effect. It was much more accurate than average doctors in lung diagnosis, but also in cases that doctors did not know what the diagnosis was, IBM's Watson was actually correct in it. So a lot of money was put in Watson at that point. But if you look at now at IBM's Watson, you don't hear a lot about it. Actually, you hardly hear anything about it. And if you look at what happened, is that the doctors were less efficient. Again, there was too much promised, and the promises were not materialized. And also, IBM pulled the plug of that, and a lot of employees were laid off at that point. It was not just IBM, also Google Glasses was introduced also for medical solutions. Google wanted to focus on hospitals purely based on their solutions, and there are many solutions actually that were introduced already in the third AI summer that were considered now a failure. So let's focus a little bit. Where was the most focus on that AI? And to find that out, we have to look at what is a very, very important boundary condition to get AI in clinical practice. and that is certification. You need in the US FDA, we need CE in Europe, and if you want to use it in clinical practice, you need those certifications. And if you look at how many of those AI algorithms have now been certified after 10 years of this AI summer, we are a little bit above 500. And also here, make a note for yourself, write down the answers, how much you did good. If you look at what these AI algorithms are focusing on, you see a huge concentration on it. And the question also for you, is this about the large language models, dentistry, cardiology, radiology? It is radiology, it's about 82%. Also the 6% that is claimed here by cardiology is really about image analysis. So there's a huge focus on AI in the radiology. And why is this? Already in the early 1980s, there was a strong focus on computational methods, computers in radiology. In 2000, was already completely the change made to digital radiology. It has a huge database, the second largest database worldwide, after satellite, not social media as the first one, but it's extremely huge. And also the radiologists are amongst the most expensive people, and there is a lot of repetitive work. So there's no wonder that a lot of those messages came out that the computers will be replaced by the radiologists will be replaced by computers, and all those messages came out. AI was focusing on radiology a lot. So what did change? We're now 10 years further, and I can give maybe a nice example of this. And here's a nice example, again, of a CT image, and you see a bleeding on the left, on the top side, where it is important to quantify this bleeding, this hemorrhage. And here in the middle image, you see a red blob, which gives the bleeding. And it's very important to distinguish that from the blue dots on the right side, which gives a shining of the bone through in the images. It is quite a difficult task, because if you look at those patches, it is rather hard to really make the distinction. But we managed to do so, and the interesting part is that it took one really bright researcher about a year to make an algorithm, rule-based algorithm that was accurate enough to use. And in 2015, we developed some deep learning, and rather than having 1 year of developing rule-based methodologies, we learned we trained the deep network for 2 days, and it was as accurate as our initial methodology. So that was a huge development actually in the image processing, and it came out in everywhere. A lot of deep networks came in the medical image processing, and I can now truly say that my job now absolutely changed, and it has completely been replaced by deep networks. So let us see how far we are. We are now 10 years in the AI summer. Did AI put radiologists out of a job? Absolutely not. There is not one radiologist that has lost his job because of the AI. So again, this was a huge overpromise of the AI, and no such thing happened. So what do we see now? There's not too much. There's a huge interest, but nobody's buying. Also, insurers are not paying for the AI. It is unclear who is liable for mistakes that are made. And also there are little proof of value in clinical practice. And also the integration is really hard. And that can be illustrated best with one example that I like to say. This is a study that has been done where 2,000 scans have been analyzed. And also about 15 radiologists were trained to work with AI. And what was the result? instead of 15 seconds, they would spend now about 30 seconds on those analysis. Maybe for complicated cases, it was even more with the AI. And what was the result of this huge study is that rather than the gain of having this very advanced AI tool was about 11 minutes per radiologist per month. So it's less than 1 cup of coffee, drinking 1 cup of coffee per radiologist. So it is very hard to show that the AI is really proof. So I will now focus a little bit on the valorization. Valorization is making impact with the research stuff that we do. To be honest, not a lot of people are interested in this part. If you talk about valorization, translation, dissemination, many people lose interest and like to go back to their code or other discussions. But it is important though. If we look here, how we can get good ideas into value in clinical practice, there are multiple phases. First, we have the epiphany. We have a great idea, an eureka moment. We can solve a clinical problem with an AI. Then we develop the AI, the model, and we will validate it. We need some testing for it. We do some workflow integration. We get the AI into the workflow, and then we evaluate the outcome. But if you look at where the attention, where all the effort is being into, you can see that in this really nice figure. On top you see the year, and on the y-axis you see the phase of the model of the AI that's working on. And you see that by far most of the AI development is being done in the AI development, where very little attention is being done in the validation and the integration part. So it's not all bad news. There are some success stories. There are a couple of AI tools that are being reimbursed and are being used in clinical practice. But if you look at the numbers here, the estimations are that about 200,000 or 300,000 of AI engineers are working out of there. There have been about 10,000 AI models published. About 500 have been certified. And if you look at how many models are considered valuable, you're talking about tens. But still, there are some solutions, and we have to focus again on stroke. Again, speed is very important, and it's difficult to delineate. We have the finding for thrombus, which is really hard for the clinicians. And let us look at the workflow that's going. So if you have a stroke, you often go with the ambulance to a nearby hospital. Often it's off hours where junior radiologist or the radiologist at bed has to look at the images, may not see it, and you have to negotiate with the neurologist, but it takes a lot of time. And often later on, the radiologist also has to go to a second treatment, and a lot of time is being lost. And remember, it is a difficult task. We do not find these thrombosis really easily, but still, it is very important. And as an example, I show this often to radiologists. Maybe you as computer scientists are better in it. Do you find a thrombus in it? Maybe you do. Put a down note, this is a thrombus. So it's hard. Another image, an image with a thrombus, with a stroke. Here it is. So that's really a difficult task. But again, we have some tools to find it. We had deep learning methods that are really fast now, and we integrated this in a solution on an app where all kind of toolings have been are being provided by the AI to give that to the clinician. And here again we find other tools. And the good thing is that it has been evaluated, and tools, AI tools like that, are valuable. And also very nice part is if you create that tool, bring it to the market, you can still work with your PhDs and and who work for this company and develop all these nice tools in it. So it's one solution. I will finish up with the next solution. Again, this is about treatment delay. If you go to a smaller hospital that does not give this treatment, you miss about 1 hour. So the ideal is that even before the ambulance starts to drive, you can detect already where the most likely successful treatment is. That you either go to the smallest, to the hospital that's close by, or that provides advanced treatment. And for this, we have developed an EEG solution that can have very fast analysis. And that has been done by 2 of my colleagues and provide that solution. But yet, if you look at EEG, that's also very hard to analyze, and surely the ambulance personnel cannot detect that. So here we also have AI tools, and together with such a solution, we have the dry electrodes and AI tools and provide good toolings. Okay, I'm gonna finish up. So we have a solution for this as well. We provided toolings, AI toolings for the analysis, and bring that to solution. Okay, I will skip this part, and maybe we can talk about that later on how to set up a company, but that we can do that later. Okay, this is what I wanted to say. If you really want to help the clinician or the patients or the clinicians, we have to really focus on solutions for the clinical practice, and we have to think outside of the academia.
Many thanks for this great talk, which let's say was from the really very beginning to what we have at that moment, and this overview of influence of artificial intelligence with all of these summers and winters. And now we have time for questions, so I will check who is in the queue to ask the question. Well, in the meantime, I have a question. What do you think about, let's say, bringing all what is now in development into, let's say, such a clinical practice? So it's because people ask, well, what are you doing? Will it be useful? And from the figures you have presented, it's just a small portion of all this goes through all these certification procedures, each takes of time. So what, according to you, are, let's say, chances to transfer the development, especially, well, I should also mention that you are one of the leader of a project which is devoted to stroke, namely to Gemini project. So, for example, what do you think about solutions from Gemini? How much it will take time to go to practice?
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't know that beforehand, and we have an idea on what can be valuable for a patient and for clinicians. And I think if we can really show what we think we can show, that it is good to have a digital twin for a procedure before you do the procedure, then we can look at the next step. Okay, but how is it needed? How well should the software be designed? How much does it cost to bring such a solution to the market? What is it worth for the clinicians? So I think there are some tools that have potential value, absolutely, but we still have to look into that a lot more before we can decide that. I think.
Well, we have in queue we have a question from Jose Souza, leader of one of Sano research teams Jose, go on, please, with your question.
Thank you, Marian. Hi, Henk. So it's Jose here. So as Marian said, I'm leading the personal health data science team. So you mentioned those 11 minutes, and why they started with images, because images, as you mentioned, also have been collected for a long time. So that's this appetence from AI perspective. That imaging is I would say, the oil that is going to drive AI.
Yeah.
But we know that healthcare is multidimensional, multimodal. Okay, and all of the examples that you showed, so they are focused on a single source of information. How you see, do you see that multimodal information needs to be the next step on AI? Okay, and that will change the paradigm of AI. Instead of focusing on these data-driven rules, they have to come into place. As you mentioned there. So, do you think that unless we solve that problem, or addressing that problem, we are not going to really have impactful AI? So we are going to have what is now called the so-so AI. So you implement the AI, but you don't have the outcome. Okay. So how you see that? So do you see that paradigm shift instead of deep learning and that only data driven, and trying to figure out how we can capture additional knowledge that can be like clinical data that is there? So I don't know if you try to look into clinical data from the patients and compare with what you see in the images, for example.
Yeah, you're absolutely very good point. I think that is the way to go. You cannot focus only on imaging, but as you know as well, our third AI summer started with the computer vision, with ImageNet and all the developments in the deep learning. So there was a huge step forward first in the computer vision part. So that's why there was a lot of focus. But of course, now we have the large language models, which much easier allows the integration of all kinds of multimodal data. And I believe absolutely that there's a huge gain. But I also would like to learn from all the mistakes that we made. We made so many mistakes in trying to make AI valuable in clinical practice. And also, if you look now at what kind of AI is allowed in clinic, what is certified, it's almost always about imaging at this point. But we know it will move forward to multimodal, and absolutely there's the future, I think. But we also have to learn and not make the same mistakes.
Well, okay, thanks. And on the questions and answers, we have on the chat, we have a question from Tamas Joza. I hope that my spelling of this Hungarian name is correct. Well, please confirm. What do you think about the application of AI for stroke prevention, e.g., based on data from wearable devices?
Yeah, it's also a very good topic. Stroke is really hard to predict, and that makes it a much harder case. So we know that 1 in 4 people may get a stroke at some point in our life. So it's quite a few. And it's really difficult because it's really difficult to measure how accurate your prevention is. Of course, it is the best way. Everybody likes to prevent a disease and not get the disease and then being treated. But I have to say it is a very difficult topic, but very valuable, I would say.
Thank you. And the next in queue is our colleague from Illich Supercomputer Center, Olaf Zimmerman. Olaf, can you go on with your question?
Yes, thank you for the talk. So you glanced a little bit over the last slides, which I found most interesting, actually. So there was this one application where you reported about an EEG-based thing in order to let's say, shorten the time from, let's say, picking up the patient to some kind of fate of where to drive him or her. And the question is, first, is it an AI-based analysis of EEG? So is there a classification by a machine learning algorithm to say yes or no? Because an EEG is not easy to read for, let's say, the typical emergency people on. So, and if so, the question is, well, how did that develop? So first, did the idea come rather from a clinician or from some technicians who know how to, let's say, go on with AI on waves? Or was it from a clinician saying, okay, this is something where we would need something that would help us? And then did it get certified? And how was the way in that direction?
Yeah, very good question. It did indeed develop from a clinical question. So when the new treatment, thrombectomy, was introduced, there was only a limited number of hospitals that could give it, and it was noted that if the patient goes to a different hospital first, we get a delay of about an hour. So it was discussions on how can we make sure that the ambulance we know whether it's a stroke or not, whether it's a large stroke. And so at that point, we evaluated all kinds of solutions that could be done in the ambulance, and even CT scanners. There are some ambulances with a CT scanner. But one of the ideas was EEG. And what was done first is that at the emergency care, all patients with a stroke, we would get the EEG to collect data to see are the differences in patterns. But we did see some differences. Then we collected data in the ambulance. Can we get data there as well? And with the number of data, we at some point we came with some feature-based techniques, machine learning techniques, but also AI techniques to do the classification or give a likelihood of that. So it really developed from a clinical research question to data generation to an AI solution.
Okay, so of course the question is whether that is something that is already certified. Yeah, so then this is one of the few examples where you somehow provide the evidence, although it is not an imaging technique, that AI is useful here. But you see that, let's say, in many cases, those people who have all the technologies to analyze such signals, they lack, let's say, a list of those things that they would like to have. Yeah, so these kind of requirements that are coming from the clinics, so they don't post it on their website. What is the most interesting thing that they would like to have some assistance with? And nor did they come forward with saying, okay, yeah, we have a lot of data on that. And here, please have it so that you can help us. So what do you see as a way forward in order to, well, this is kind of an obvious barrier, which is harming both sides. And I think that has to be lowered somehow. And I don't know what is lowering that barrier. Is that really politics only, or is that something like attitude and or platforms for communicating, or what do you think is the best way forward here?
Yeah, that's a huge issue, clearly, and that will not be solved directly. But I think it's extremely important that technicians and clinicians talk a lot with each other. I have quite a few AI researchers, also AI, but also other technological researchers here in the hospital, and I enforce them to talk with clinicians so that they really understand what the problems are, but also the other way around. There are so many clinicians who have such high hopes of AI that it's unrealistic. So we have to enforce communication. We do it here by having meetings with both clinicians and technological people. We also like projects that like Gemini, where Marianne and I are involved in. We have very technical people, we have clinical people, and they just by communicating, understanding each other's problems and solutions, that is a way to move forward. But it's not an easy task.
But in
clinicians like to-
particular, if you are crossing, let's say, your institutional borders, yeah. So
yeah. And clinicians they prefer to talk with other clinicians about their patients, and technical people like to talk with other technical people about their codes. So it's not an easy task.
thanks.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to invite Wiesław Nowinski. Wiesław is a person who spent a lot of time working on atlases of Bayern in Singapore, and now is with us at Sano. So Wiesław, please go on.
Yeah, thank you, Marian. Thanks, Henk, for this exciting presentation. I have few technical questions. First, about collateral circulation. You just enhance the scale proposed by Dave Libeskin, make it more quantitative. How did you do that? Did you segment vessels, or do you just measure flow and how much time it takes?
Yeah, good question. Indeed, we measure the opacified vessels, so all the arteries in a CT angiogram, CTA, that show up, and we quantify how much lumen is in the vessel, so how much contrast is in the vessel. So we don't do flow, but you have a snapshot in one time. And we combine that with the determining the downstream area of an occlusion. So if you have an occlusion, there's an area that does not get direct flow. If we see arteries lighting up in that area, we measure how much actually pixels is in that. And that's also based on how clinicians describe their score, but we wanted to quantify it.
How much time it takes?
It takes now about 40 seconds, I think.
Excellent. Yeah, another issue you mentioned that you project left to right, measure symmetry, but you need to get mid-sagittal plane. How do you calculate mid-sagittal plane, especially that interhemic fissure is sometimes curved? It's one issue. Second, if you just directly project left into right, you have so-called Jacobian effect. So how do you deal with this kind of issues?
Yeah, absolutely. Nice question. So let me start. So what's important that this is only done in the very early scans. So patient comes in. That also means that there is no mass working, no swelling. So the brain is still relatively symmetric. If you wait a couple of hours more, then the swelling and then the mid-plane also gets away from the center. But what we do is we match the scan that we have with an atlas. So an image, a default image that we use. And in that atlas, there's already a mid-plane delineated, given, and we use that mid-plane from that atlas in that image. The second step is indeed there is difference between left and right. So we do not do a full only a symmetry projection and reflection, but we also allow the image to move a little bit so that we have a registration, non-rigid registration a bit. That allows for the non-symmetric parts of the brain.
How do you distinguish thrombus from calcification, especially which is occurring more often with aging?
Yeah. So calcification has even a higher intensity in CT. So mostly, and it's also circular in the arterial wall. So that's how we often can distinguish between it. But sometimes you have a calcified thrombus. So thrombus with quite some calcium in it. It's less than 1%, I would say, about 0.5% of all patients. And then it's really hard. Then you cannot distinguish it, but in the rest of the patients, it is possible.
Yeah, you also show some images of subarachnoid hemorrhage. Again, how can you distinguish it from bone?
Yeah, so we had first the rule-based methodology that looks also outside the plane. So if you have bones that's shining through, then in some slides you have even higher intensities in the densities in the images. And so with those rules, we were able to distinguish between it. And now we just have deep learning networks, and we gave a lot of examples. This is bone, this is hemorrhage. And that's now the deep networks can distinguish it from each other.
And what is the sensitivity and specificity by using deep learning?
I do not know this by heart, but it's pretty high. For
Oh.
hemorrhages, it's over 95%.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Yeah, yeah, you commented that, of course, AI will not replace the radiologist. But if you ask the Nobel Prize winner in AI, Hinton, last year, he definitely says AI will replace radiologists in a couple of years. Can you comment from this perspective?
Yeah, I don't see any signs yet. It was predicted 10 years ago. I also expected this, but nothing happens. I'm waiting.
Okay. So regarding early stroke detection, especially in fact detection from CT, which we know that it has very low sensitivity. So do you believe that AI will help for early diagnosis? It means detection of ischemic stroke from CT?
Yeah, it does help. We've seen examples, well, that if you look at the expert radiologist, he is faster than AI. If you look at non-stroke radiologists and starting radiologists, then the AI is faster. So the diagnosis is being done faster with AI on average.
Yeah, but I am talking not from point of view of speed, from point of view of sensitivity.
Yeah.
So do you believe that AI can provide a higher sensitivity than an experienced stroke neuroradiologist?
Not than experienced stroke neuroradiologist, no.
Yeah, because in the past we have developed an algorithm published in investigative radiology, which really show that it's possible to identify stroke in CT better than neuroradiologists. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough cases, so I believe that maybe AI can really make a difference here. But anyway, it's a past.
Yeah, also,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Sorry, Marian. So if I can still, you mentioned about you have a method for vessel occlusion. How your method compared to something which is on the market? For example, there is a company like Brainomics, which has FDA cleared the algorithm for that. Can you compare?
Yeah, now there are multiple solutions for it. In the beginning, there was no solution. So we started on this work when there were no commercial solutions available. Now there are quite a few. Now we have Viz AI, Rapid AI, Brainomics. And I must say they are pretty comparable to each other. And I should also say, so our solution has now been spun out by the company Nicolab. And so we have now commercial solutions, and which are, I think, approximately similar in sensitivity and specificity.
Great, fantastic. So last question. Yeah, EEG, does it cover the whole brain, meaning with MCA, ACA, PCA, or only for MCA?
So our EEG acquisition tool that we developed is only on the MCA field. Also because the treatment, the thrombectomy, has only been proven successful or valuable in MCA large vessel occlusions.
Okay. So thank you so much and good luck.
Thank you.
Well,
Thanks for your
many
questions.
thanks. Yes, I think that this, let's say, dilemma, if artificial intelligence will replace a radiologist in general medical doctors, well, last week we had in Krakow something what is called for 1 week Copernicus Festival, and yesterday our colleague from Sano, Paulina Tworek, has demonstrated how artificial intelligence can, let's say, somehow help medical doctors on a specific example from a hospital in American year Olsztyn in Poland. So it is, I think that it will be rather collaboration than elimination of one of these, and it will be probably the most successful. But anyhow, this is recorded, this Copernicus Festival, and it's possible to see how not only this one, but many other. Anyhow, I think that it was great talk. It was a good discussion, and it is a part of also research in the framework of Gemini project. And Henk has presented one side of this research. There is another side also related to, let's say, some modeling and simulation of all of these phenomena. I hope that it will be possible to have at our seminar people responsible for this part. Among other, we will not have, and I hope that also Rosemary Blanco, who is now from Sano, who is at Henk's team, is one of these 60 PhD students, and will be very successful in this work, I hope. And anyhow, on June 16, on Monday, we will have Sandrine Morel from Geneva also talking about another aspect of research in Gemini. So, Henk, many thanks for talk, many thanks for discussion, and well, have a good time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. See you next time, Sano. Bye-bye.
Bye.